for queerness to be something that actually enhances what God is doing in the world and actually reveals something about what God is doing here.
The Change Podcast. Everything changes, everything stays the same.
Hello, lovely listeners. Welcome back to the Change Podcast. Oh, it's been a little while since we've spoken. We have a lot to catch up on, but we'll do all of that in a future episode because today we are blessed again to have Steff Fenton here. How are you going?
Going well. Thanks for having me.
Lovely.
I'm looking forward to it.
For those of you who watched the last podcast, you'll know Steff. My dad had a very rich conversation with Steff about their coming out in the church. And Steff and I also spoke on that evening. They referenced the podcast a few times. But we decided, personally, my own perfectionist wanted to do a better job. So we've come back and Steff was gracious enough to share their time with me again.
With no pressure today to be perfect. Again.
Yes. Well, we're going to go with the casual approach, the classic Change Podcast rambling, which is hopefully insightful.
I can do that.
Yeah. You spoke with my dad about more of your sexuality in the church. Today we're going to look more at maybe gender identity and sex and spirituality and how all of those themes fit together. Talk about some morality with transitioning even.
Love it.
Let's see where we go. I guess to start off, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello. My name is Steff Fenton. I am a genderqueer Christian, so fall in the kind of non-binary trans spectrum of experiencing gender identity, which we'll talk a little bit about. I'm a co-pastor of an independent church that meets in Glebe in Sydney's inner city, and I'm a chaplain at UNSW with the Uniting Church. I also like to play hockey.
Oh, nice.
Love a good oat mocker. I don't know. That's enough, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that's great.
That's a bit about me.
Coffee and slapping a puck around. Yes, I prefer a maca milk latte myself, but oat milk is my second favorite.
Yeah, sustainability all the way.
Yeah. And there's so many good flavors of plant milk now. Why do we need cow pussy milk? Yeah.
Also a really good bonding for us is veganism as well. I am an imperfect vegan, which is kind of the flexitarian vegan, I guess. Yeah.
I go by sustainable eater.
Great.
Yeah, because it's not a sin to have a little bit of meat here and there. Also, you can choose more sustainable meat choices, but kind of the philosophy behind veganism is to try and not be harming or exploiting animals and exploiting the environment. So moderation is fine.
Yeah.
Veganism is very extreme.
Yeah. And for all those meat eaters out there, don't worry, we will hate the sin but love the sinner.
And we'll also love a treat here and there too. I'm a sucker for sushi. I can't.
Yeah.
I can't go without for too long.
Yeah, mine is halloumi or maybe just a cheeseburger every now and then. Yeah.
Yeah, nice. A good cheeseburger is amazing. I haven't had halloumi in a long time. I miss that salty, rubbery goodness.
Uh-huh.
Oh, lovely. I'd love to try and unpack, I guess, what does it mean to be genderqueer? Because, for me, transitioning from male to female is maybe a bit more obvious what I'm doing, a bit more understandable. I'm swapping from one binary to the other. So what does it mean to break out of the binary?
So I was assigned female at birth, and for a lot of my life that was, I was female or a socialized female. It wasn't until maybe my late 20s when I went to a queer Christian conference and I was asked for the first time in my life, what are your pronouns? And as I wrote down she, her, because that's how I'd been socialized in my gender up until that point, I was like, what on earth is happening? I feel incredibly uncomfortable being locked into this box of female and she, her. And I really didn't understand what was happening at that point in my life. And from there, that kind of springboarded a bunch of reflection on who I am. I've written a little bit about some of my journey in recognizing the way that sometimes when I cut my hair short, my hair wasn't short my whole life, but when I cut my hair short for the first time in my life, people started referring to me with male gendered language, binary gendered language. So, I'd get a lot of like, hey dudes, when I was with other male friends. My housemate who's male, I would pick up our takeaway order and they would, call me by his name. And I just started.
Was that jolting?
Well, it was really affirming.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, I really like this. I really like people seeing this maleness or this masculinity about me, combined with this uncomfortability with the female category and being locked in that box. And then I just discovered that some people fall somewhere in the middle and they float between the two, and masculinity and femininity is a bit fluid and it's queer and it's just sort of all in the middle there, that you don't really have to choose one or the other. And discovering that was really freeing. And I was like, actually, I think I really like this, and I think this feels like me, because for a lot of my life, I've been described as sort of one of the girls and one of the boys, and being able to float in between spaces. And, I felt a lot of what I did in what I wore, in what I did, was just to kind of perform being a woman. And then breaking out of that, cutting my hair short, then wearing more what I wanted to wear. I'd always wanted to do that stuff. And finally I was like, oh, I can do that.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's curious how subconscious these feelings can be until, because we're brought into the world and we don't, we just, as young children, are these sponges that absorb, oh, this is the way things are. And, we also get in subtle ways discouraged from questioning some of these things. And so we internalize that. And then by the time we're suddenly adults, we might realize, oh, I'm doing all of this stuff all the time and it's not even me and it's exhausting. It's really funny having that come up.
Yeah, it is really exhausting when you realize, I actually didn't have to be doing that all along. Like I could have not been doing that. That's amazing. How freeing is that? Yeah. And you just feel like you to fit in or to belong, or, even that kind of feels maybe not exactly it, but it's just what you do, as you're making your way through the world and you're trying to find friends and have a good time and connect with people, is, this is the easiest way to do that, or something like that.
Yeah. So I've been reading a little bit about transgenderism and feminism, trying to educate myself on some of these themes. And I guess, part of what this is like, so our binary genders are characterized as opposites. They're in opposition to each other. And so because there's such a stark contrast in the way we characterize them, we don't allow for this fluidity of some values being able to exist in both, such as like power and strength might be both masculine and feminine. Just a controversial idea, but when we're children, it doesn't matter if your parents are like, oh, we're going to raise you gender neutral, we're going to give you neutral colors, and we will allow you to play with trucks and dolls, because gender is so salient in our society, that the moment a child starts to realize, oh, okay, like people call me a girl, and all of the girls I see act in this way, and children are very much trying to like be someone, so they're going to start acting in the ways that is a girl, and everyone will like it's so common in our language. Come on, girls, be a good girl or whatever. Like, hard to come up with examples on the spot, but yeah. So it is something that we will intrinsically start to like. We will just start to internalize these behaviors in our own self-perception. We'll start to identify with them, even though they may not be actually who we want to be. And then we get 20 years down the line and we're like, oh my God, I'm living my life. I have to live in one half of the spectrum of identity that I could be. Why?
Yeah. And so much of that framework as well is the negative, what's the verb of negative? Nagging. Let's just say nagging of things associated with femininity and women. So, I did a thesis recently around masculinity in Greco-Roman antiquity. So in the first century, or, that kind of point at which we say Jesus lived, before and after that.
Yep.
And yeah, patriarchy has just been going for so long. It's this underground framework that just influences so much of how we behave and what we value and what we say that's good or that's not good. And the stark binary patriarchy really rests on that, in saying, maleness and masculinity defined in this way is good, and everything else, feminine, inferior, emotion, serving, subservient, invulnerability.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So like, in order for patriarchy to continue, that binary has to continue too, because as soon as you break that open and say, actually, you could choose to embrace values, for instance, or whatever means most to you as a human, gender or not, then patriarchy can't continue. And so it's pretty strong, strong flavor in the
world. There's a bit of resistance too to those who are benefiting from patriarchy to let that go. But so is that so being genderqueer is you're choosing to identify by values over gender performance?
Yeah, I think and it's funny because one of my earliest memories and one of the earliest things that I wrote about on my blog, which I thought was sexuality related, was this memory that I have about my dad tucking me in for bed one night when I was really young, in primary school, I think, and me saying, "Can I be a boy when I go to heaven?" And there's actually a lot of evidence saying that kids by about the age of 4, or some evidence, I will say, that kids have a pretty strong identity by that age. And so reflecting back on that even, and thinking, well, I was that young and I was thinking I'm uncomfortable in this female box and I want to embrace maleness in some form. But yeah, so I think once I figured out that actually I don't have to be in this category of female anymore, and it was the gift of a friend of mine who actually said, I think that you might be non-binary or somewhere in this spectrum. How would it be if I started using they, them pronouns for you and just see how it feels?
Wow.
I know. Yeah.
That is really accepting and open of them.
Really
That's
beautiful. Yeah. So I really thank him for that gift to me, because he was the reason why I realized actually when you use the pronouns they, them, and you identify me and you see me outside of the binary, I do feel seen, and I feel so affirmed in who I am that I can just be, I don't have to be this or be that. I can just be. And I think that's what my gender identity is that it's really not associated with this or that or doing this or that, but rather just existing as a good human. And I talk about just, I just want to move through the world living healthily, like having good times, having joy, having creativity, all these things that are non-gendered. I want to wear things that, why do we say that's men's clothing and that's women's clothing? I want to wear from across the spectrum of clothing. Like so much is just gendered in our world. And for me, gender is this category that doesn't really have meaning for me in forming what I do. It's just not there as something which is like, oh yeah, my gender is why I do that. Yeah. That's just a non-experience for me. And I don't know what it feels like. If other people feel that, I don't get it. I don't understand it.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is. It's so interesting how we can all have vastly different experiences of identity and gender and sexuality and sex as well. Like how we feel our physical forms are internally, for example. And these things, society categorizes them all together. Like if you have the male sex, then your sexuality is interested in women and your gender is man. And so that comes with these behaviors and these wardrobes and these attitudes, etc., and vice versa for women. And while we are slowly starting to break that a bit with sexuality, we're still a long way away from breaking the gender and sex connection pairing that we have, in that we don't allow for people to have an internal experience of sex that maybe doesn't align with their physical form. We call that unnatural or sick or broken. Something that I've dealt with my whole life. It hasn't ever made sense to me, but for you, gender isn't as big of a part of your identity. For some reason, for me, it is. And I just remember whenever I was younger, all of the people I looked up to were women, like Britney Spears, for example. I wanted to look like her. I wanted to, perform like her and be able to wear feminine outfits. And so when I started going through puberty and developing my male sex characteristics, that was the first time I really started experiencing like physical dysphoria. And I'm only just starting to realize that part of my trans identity is physical, it's physiological, because partly the way I'm perceived. I never wanted to be intimidating and bulky, and I am. And it's so annoying because sometimes I just want to communicate how I'm feeling with people without intimidating them. And so, yeah, I've always felt internally more cute and soft and dainty, and I wanted to express myself in that way and in more flamboyant and colorful ways and wear flowy clothing. And so part of that is my physiology, and part of that is my gender role. And for me, those things align. The gender role that I want to play is woman, and the sex that I want to be is female. And so those things align. And so then I can just move from one binary to the other. But that's not the only trans experience. The other trans experiences can be, feeling fine in your physical sex and just wanting to express a different gender. So you can have, an internal sense of sex and an internal sense of gender that maybe differ. And for you, we were speaking before how your physiology somewhat comes into it.
Yeah. I think you're picking up on sort of the three things which are really important when you delve into the realm of gender. And gender identity is this, there are bodily sexed characteristics, like there are physiological characteristics which inform our gender. There's an internal sense of who you are, which informs your gender identity. And then there's this social gender. There's these things that we do. And so it'll be different for different people, that, you know, cisgender or transgender, or, you know, however, you know, that's the two categories that we've got pretty much, is like, you know, figuring out how all those things intersect will be so unique for everyone.
Yeah.
And I forget who it is that said, you know, there's 7 billion people in the world, so therefore there's 7 billion genders in the world. Is like, so some people will move through life in thinking actually these sex characteristics that I have physiologically and this internal sense of who I am and the way that I present in the world for gender reasons, you know, that's all good. Like, I don't have any issues with that. I think maybe where we kind of get grapplings is around some of the feminist movement and breaking down of patriarchy and breaking down some of that social gender stuff of what we do, and saying actually the social gender, I want to express my internal sense of who I am, which does align with my physiology and the way that, you know, I was assigned at birth. You know, that all aligns, but the way that I express myself in the world, like, I don't necessarily want that to come from patriarchal informed gender binaries, you know. So then the social gender might be a little bit off, but once you figure that out, you know, that's your cisgender experience of like things align then, but you might have a little bit of weird social stuff. But then I think, you know, our experience is just like, all of those things are kind of off in some way. Like you know, the physical experience of my body is not exactly how I perceive myself to be internally, and the way that I'm interacting in the world and the way that people perceive me is misaligned in some way. And I think that's what kind of separates the cis and the trans experience of like those three things, you know, moving around together in terms of like what gender and how we experience gender is. But yeah, so for me, once I had experienced a social affirmation through my friend, you know, seeing me in a social sense and seeing who I am and how I'm expressing my gender in the world, once they had seen that and it matched up with this internal sense of who I am, that I am genderqueer, I'm fluid, I move between those two boxes, I'm out of the binary. Once those two had lined up, then I started feeling real distress around some of my physiological characteristics and the fact that my body didn't align with this internal sense of who I am and this social recognition of who I am.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I'm hoping to have a gender affirming surgery in May. I'm hoping, you know, I experience a lot of chest dysphoria at the moment. I'm wearing a binder to flatten my chest because anytime I see my chest and it's not flattened, you know, I don't like it. It really, it's discomforting, and I want it gone. And if there's something in the world that can get rid of that and I don't have to feel that ever again, and if a surgeon can do that for me, you know, thank you so much, you know, sign me up. Where's how do I do that? Because that is worth all the well-being and all the value in the world to be able to do that.
Yeah, that's really beautiful, and I'm so excited for you to be able to do that so soon. That's very exciting. Yeah, and I mean, it says something about our social world, right? Because boobs must be one of the most gendered body parts, the most gender signaling, and they come with the most baggage. Like, they draw the most attention, and I don't know what I'm trying to say here. It's just that like, yeah, I can imagine that because we have such a strong, like, gender is so salient in our society, we have such a strong, like every single person immediately genders you. And especially from a distance, one of the first things you would use is boobs. It would be so restrictive to constantly be misgendered just because of your chest area. And then with that then comes the whole social ramifications of the box of expectations that gets placed on you on what's appropriate for you. And the moment you then start acting in certain ways that maybe don't fit that box, people recoil. They feel uncomfortable by you. And the social issues are so entwined with it all.
Yeah. And we were kind of talking off mic before we started recording about how much the way that people perceive us, if I feel reasonably comfortable in myself at this point, being able to be moving towards surgery is a key part of that. Like if that wasn't happening, I think I would still be feeling, there's a misalignment. But the fact that I'm moving towards that, I can see that soon I'm going to be aligned in who I am. And that's a really beautiful thing. Like I'm so excited for that.
Yeah.
But then the fact that all those things are aligned for me, and I'm going to feel so good about who I am and so authentic in my body and in my gender identity, but then I still move out into the world and people assign me female, and they'll read my gender or they'll misgender me. And that like, it's hard because I wonder how much better I would feel about myself, or how much better you would feel about yourself if people were better. It just, it's really, takes so much energy to move into new spaces. This year I was like, I want to play hockey again. Yeah. I'm like, well, hockey is binary. Choose a team, male or female. When I go to training, it's like ladies. And I'm like, that's not me. And so it's just hard. It's like, I just want to play a sport. But that has to be binary too, I feel the sense of sadness and frustration that our world is so like it is. And
because why can't people come openly to us and say, hi, who are you? Instead of being, hey, you're this way, I'm going to treat you this way. And then suddenly the onus is on us to show you who we are, to correct you, or it's just an exhausting process to have to do every time you go into a new space because of this, hierarchy of gender is one of the first most important things that we categorize people by. Essentially, there's, the 7 billion people argument, the 7 billion genders. Society wants us to believe that there is only two types of person. It's insane to think that because of some invisible characteristic, someone's chromosomes, not even that. We don't even inspect someone's chromosomes to decide. It's literally you come out of the womb, they look at whether you have a penis or not, and then they go, okay, there you go, boom, you're male or female, and you're now on that side of the spectrum for life. And I mean, we don't really go around inspecting people's genitals that regularly, but there's so many different ways to be. There's so many different fun things that we can do. There's so many different outfits and clothes and colors and values and roles, particularly roles that we can all mix and match with and, play to our own strengths instead of trying to constantly be something that we're not. That it just doesn't make sense that this is such an enforced structure in our world. And so, I mean, this is something I would love to talk to you about because, where does that come from? Obviously, it has historical origins. And I know, I'm not super versed in this, but I know that heteronormativity, the idea that being heterosexual is the natural way to be, is somewhat has some origins in the judeo-christian tradition, and a lot of our society has been built out of the Greco-Roman period with the church, and the church and the state have always been somewhat entwined. So essentially, where does this tradition of gender come from, of categorizing people by sex and gender and these gender roles? Do you have any idea where that stems from, and what is the what does the church say about it?
Yeah, my sense is that it's an empirical, it comes out of kingdoms and, empires which say this is what we value and this is what we don't value, and that's how we keep control and that's who will rule. It's really interesting when you contrast Western empirical colonial history with Indigenous communities and the existence of gender diversity in like all these wonderful communities across the globe through our history. Is there's actually been really beautiful valued spaces for people who are gender diverse for centuries.
Yeah, with their own unique strengths, and so therefore they can do certain roles well in society.
Yeah.
They're valued for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and even a sacredness to about it, or a specialness to about it. The fact that these people actually have something really wonderful to teach us. Or as you say, like performing a special role that neither men nor women can do. And so seeing that really contrasted, and the fact that a large part of colonial history and what they did when they took over land and people in this awfully violent way was to, those gender diverse people were some of the first to go because they threatened the empire, the colonial empire, and
control.
Yeah. So, yeah.
And it's interesting how with the passage of time, because each new generation that gets born into the world, they just get the world as it is, and then we kind of lose track of where things came from, and so then we kind of like get this instinct that this is the natural way of things, that in some way your chromosomes entirely determine the ways that you behave. Like it's natural for boys to be all of the traits that boys are, more competitive and dirty and
strong, powerful,
and destructive, and strong, powerful, etc. Leader,
controlling,
leaders,
and in control, authoritative,
and they kind of miss the role of socialization in that process. Like we have an insanely rich social history, and the whole, even social, like our heritage has influenced our genetics. Epigenetics is the new field of biology, which shows how our gene expression is modified by so many factors in our life, including the ways that we act and behave, and our mindset can affect our gene expression. And so, obviously, it's not as natural and starkly contrast as we think. There was no defining point in my life that made me trans. I was the way I was always from the beginning, which means that I must be a natural part of the universe, right? And so, clearly these things can exist.
And that word natural or unnatural is, has so much weight, particularly within the Christian faith of, thinking that people need to be within this binary, that it's a createdness about, male and female, and that those strict binaries is something that is the way that God has created the world, is that's what people are, and that trans people fall outside of that natural created order. But if we could say, actually, what we're seeing now is that gender diversity and the expression of gender, and just even the spectrum of maleness to femaleness, even if you still exist in a binary cisgendered identity, that spectrum of the way that gender can be expressed and experienced is so vast and different. You know, the fact that, you know, you could meet one male here and one male here and then be very different people, or one woman here and one woman here and then be very different. You know, that's what I mean about this like 7 billion genders thing. Is like, but rather than kind of dig our heels in on, well, you know, this is what we've known so far, this is how it's been, is to instead say, well, actually what we're noticing now is this beautiful diversity, and that maybe that's natural.
Yep.
You know, maybe that's the natural created order, right?
I love that we have to say maybe because we're trying to soften the blow for people. Like, that
is the natural created order.
Come on, look at it. It's happening. It's clearly natural.
Yeah. That's people's experiences for centuries, is to fall outside of that and be different. There's something about the way that humans were made that is vastly more diverse than we've described in the past.
Yeah. And it's beautiful too. Like, I mean, you know, look at us. We're both fully functional adults. We're sitting down to have a rich, meaningful conversation where we're, you know, thoughtful. There's nothing wrong with us and we're not harming anyone. So why apply this control to us to say that like feeling this way is wrong? And I mean, yeah, so this is where like spirituality comes into it, the whole idea of right and wrong, of morality, and something that always held me back from stepping into these feelings publicly. I mean, they were always there. I always felt them and I explored them privately, but I was always ridden with shame because of this like framework that we were given, which was that, you know, our nature is at root sinful, and therefore don't trust yourself, because the only way to be good is to follow our order, and to follow our order, you know, these are the rules. And so what then stopped me, I guess, like when I started coming out and accepting this part of myself, the biggest resistance I had to just like, you know, throwing cake to the wind. I don't know what the saying is. Throwing caution to the wind and just going for it and just being like, you know what? Yes, this is who I am. I'm going to transition. Was this sense of like, is this the wrong thing to do? Is this somehow wrong? Is this somehow harming my spiritual growth, or in some way, I don't know, like there was some feeling there that maybe what I was doing was not in line with the holiness of heaven. So I just want to like unpack that a bit with you, because you've studied spirituality and LGBT issues. Like, what does the Bible say about gender? Does the Bible express that it's wrong to be trans, or that you have to have this direct correlation between gender and sex?
Yeah. I mean, not yeah.
Yeah to the question.
Yes, that's it. Surprise.
Yeah. Yes.
I think what is really strange or doesn't make sense to me now that I've done the gender journey that I've had is how much our gender identity is core to our relationship to God, or core to our expression of faith in the church. So the fact that you are male and you behave in this way and men do this is so important to your faith, and that men that women are this and they behave like this and perform their faith in this way. For me, I see the way that God shows up in the world in the Hebrew Bible is about saying those things or those norms that you've accepted as normal, actually I'm doing things differently. And the way that you've categorized value to different kinds of people, or the way that you've structured your world is not all there is, and I want to do something new. And one of the most central core stories of the Hebrew Bible is about liberation from slavery. So the fact that the Israelites are brought up out of Egypt is told over and over and over and over again, that this is the kind of community you will be. You will be a liberating community. You will break the shackles. You will unbind people from restrictiveness. And what you will instill in your community is a greater sense of justice and equality and equity, and you won't leave people behind. You'll bring them in and you'll uplift them, and that will be what I do through you. And that's why you keep telling this story in your tradition. And it's what I'll show up in the world, and I'll actually say, here I am in the flesh, and I'm going to heal that person who is begging on the side of the road because you haven't seen that they should deserve a full life too. Or, go into the home of that person who you've said doesn't deserve to belong, or, and much of my thesis was around the kingdom of heaven, and the way that this Greek word kingdom, basileia, is a word that's used for the Roman Empire. And so it's in stark contrast and continually subverting a hierarchical, violent, patriarchal empire to say, I am actually instilling a different kind of empire here. I'm instilling a different kind of reign here, one which has the presence of the God self, the heavenly realms here on earth. I'm going to bring a sense of love and justice here on earth. That's what I'm instilling. And it's to subvert hierarchy and subvert violence, and to subvert the fact that you say men are better and women aren't, and to actually say, men, no, live outside of that, because that's not the liberating God. That's not the community that I called you to be this many thousands of years ago. I think I'll just keep going on this rant a little bit to talk about this figure of the eunuch, which was a central part of my thesis, which was there's this strange, odd teaching that Jesus says in Matthew 19:12, which is that there are eunuchs who are eunuchs from birth, eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others, and eunuchs who become eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of heaven. So this subverting new community, there will be people who become like eunuchs for the sake of this new community that's resisting this hierarchical patriarchal empire. What does Jesus mean there? And eunuchs were these figures who it was really awful. They were essentially slaves who were men who were castrated. But they were also, people who were born eunuchs were people who had weird genitalia, or barren women could fall into the category of eunuchs. They were basically just these gender bending people who could fall outside of categories of male and female. And sometimes they get categorized as women. Sometimes they get categorized as a third type of gender. Sometimes they get categorized as not human at all. They're just so different that we're not even going to let them have humanity. So right? So to become like a eunuch is to become like someone who completely puts a bomb underneath binary gender categories and confuses everyone, and actually says my core identity won't come from being male or female or any form of this patriarchal ideology about gender that you've got going on here, but they'll just be completely different. They'll live outside of it. And that is part of the kingdom that I'm building here on earth. That's the community that I'm doing. That's part of the subverting that I'm doing. That's part of the liberating that I'm doing, is to actually be messing things up. That's the God that I've always been. And now I'm going to reveal it in a new way here, and be really explicit about it. So that's what I say about That's my long rant. Here ends my sermon.
Goodness. I'm filled with flame.
But
that's powerful.
Right?
That's really flipping powerful, because it is like the pure opposite of some of the, it's definitely not, I don't want to generalize, but at least a lot of the Christianity that I experienced growing up, and part of the reason why I fell away was these really, I just couldn't understand some of the dogmatic ideologies and the restrictions in thinking, and the discrimination and prejudice that Christianity encouraged, openly and commonly encouraged towards groups of people, when also preaching love and the whole, like, I couldn't get around the hate the sin but not the sinner stuff, because if you're calling someone a sinner, that is an inherently hateful statement. But I mean, it never occurred to me that Christianity could be entirely conceptualized as freedom.
Yeah, and for queerness to be something that actually enhances what God is doing in the world and actually reveals something about what God is doing here. The fact that we live lives that naturally dismantle the way that things have been done, and the fact that our narrative won't just be easy, that we won't just do X, Y, Z in our lives. Like, that this beautiful queer community is one that together says, actually, we're going to question all that stuff that you heteronormative cis people are doing, because it doesn't make sense for our lives.
Yeah.
And by provoking all of these questions, we bring up, is that the best way of doing it? Because what you're doing is, it's just so natural for you to fall into a path that the world says is normal.
Yeah.
But then we're this beautiful community that sits on the sidelines here and says, actually, nah, that doesn't work for us. And we're going to question things and push boxes and blur boundaries and say, maybe let's think about, the fact that you've always done that. Is that healthy?
Yeah.
Is that good?
Yeah.
And I think one of the biggest points of gender and sexuality that we're wrestling with at the moment, that the church never points to, is toxic masculinity and the way that men misuse power and abuse those who are vulnerable in their communities. That's what the Me Too, Church Too movement is all about. And that's what we're seeing left, right, and center, is all of this violence, which is exactly comes from patriarchy, this violent hierarchy and this misuse of power that we've said comes from God, and that we've said ordained in this church sphere. I'm like, why is no one focusing on that as the problem of gender and sexuality? And why are they saying we are the problem with gender and sexuality, or we're the problem with gender, when there's a thing that's happening in your community?
There's actual toxicity happening.
That is violent and harmful, and we see in front of us.
Yeah, wow.
And
it's so funny how, like, since I've started transitioning, finally communicating with my girlfriends in a way where they can express their, because I'm coming into women's spaces and engaging with them, they're being a lot more open with me in their pure experience. And one of the things that keeps coming up is different ways of essentially women taking the onus of responsibility for male toxicity, because of this patriarchal system. It's inherently it's the way we're socialized, with the whole boys will be boys mentality. It's normal for boys to be overly sexually driven and just to be visually stimulated by sex and be unable to control their urges. And so therefore it's women who need to cover themselves and not express themselves sexually to make it easier for men, when the reality is that men should be able to control their urges as civilized people. And so, a lot of my girlfriends are like, oh, I just want to be able to go to the club and feel good in my body and dance, because dancing is one of the most freeing and empowering activities you can do. And when you're feeling good in your body, it looks sexy. And so then the problem with that is, as soon as women start feeling good in their body, men start to watch them, and then they say, oh, they must want it because I know what they want. And when they're feeling sexy, it means that it means that they want male attention. It's all about, everything a woman does is for male attention as well. Like all of this is so involved in patriarchal systems. And so then women feel uncomfortable going out into public and just being able to express themselves as in their femininity. And this is horrendous that this is happening. And so I have to remind women, no, that's a them problem. It's men's issue. If they're suddenly filled with an urge to have sex, they have to deal with the dissatisfaction of not getting that urge met. And any, healthy male will be able to do that in an easy way. It'll just be like, oh yeah, whatever, I'll just keep dancing because it's not a big deal. But, because of this whole like boys will be boys mentality, you get what you want, then men get frustrated by it. And it's like both of the sides are like playing into this system. Anyway.
Yeah. And I think for those of us who are in faith circles, particularly Christian circles, if we were to go back to that point about our gender is so central to our faith, if we were to de-gender our faith and say, well, actually, what is at the core of what our faith is about, regardless of gender? Because I would say that our faith is about the flourishing of all life and the fact that God created a world that God wanted to have full life from, and that's our purpose, that's our destiny, that's where the mission and ministry of God is trying to come alive in the world, is really this fullness of life in all things. And so where's gender there? Where's gender in love and grace and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness and self-control? Where is gender in equity and justice? The fact that we should be striving that all humans, all life deserves to live. Gender doesn't have to come into that. Like it's really not that central. Yes, gender has been misused and is a core category of criticism that we need to say, actually, well, the way that we value things and the injustices that we see is gendered. Yeah. But let's move away from that as people of faith.
And we don't have to abolish gender. No one's saying that gender is evil. Like there can still be, the feminine and masculine performance that you want to do. Like we don't have to get rid of heels or tank tops. But it should be a choice, because if at root our humanity is all of those virtues that you've listed, if we're doing all of those things, then we are living fully. And then to add to that fullness, do what makes you feel good. And for me, what makes me feel good is making myself colorful and pretty and dancing in a flowy way. And that's just me.
Yep. And you living in that way and being fully who you are and expressing yourself in the way that feels right lets love overflow in your life and lets life fill up. And I'm like, that's
and so God. Then I can give love to everyone else around me.
And I just think that, talking about spirituality, that's the presence of the divine for me, is where love and life overflows and where people feel healthy and integrated in themselves and feel seen and known and loved for who they are and able to then express with health the values of God and the life of God with others. That's my understanding of faith and spirituality, and all the work that we do around, we could call it unnatural, sinful stuff that kind of flows around, is this stuff that does promote unhealth and ill health and harm, and working on that and really saying, well, actually, let's figure out what that stuff is. That might not be what the church has historically told us is the unnatural, sinful stuff. Let's actually look for where that ill health actually is.
Yeah, and maybe historically the some of the stuff that they used to list as sinful might have been the unhealthy stuff. Homosexuality might have been more dangerous back in the day. I don't know, but contextually speaking, that might be where that tradition comes from. But then we haven't allowed people to critique this system. So I love the imagery of the trans and gender diverse people being the martyrs of like using their own self-sacrifice and putting themselves into adversity and challenge to question these systems, to say, is this like what's actually healthy and what's actually not? I'm going to risk myself to see if this is actually a bad way to live, and I'll let you know, but as long as you're open to listening and not judging me in the process. But yeah, there seems to be this interplay where at a certain time we need to work out what the unhealthy and sinful behaviors are, and then we need to apply order to the world in order to create society and civilization, and have these structures so that we can all work together, so that it's not just chaos and randomness and everyone fending for themselves. Like, we do need some kind of unifying system, but that system also needs to be open to feedback and criticism and challenge as time goes on, because as time goes on, everything else changes around that system freely. Like, so much has changed in 2,000 years. The whole way that we can do life now is completely different by technological advances and medical advances and so on. And so if that system doesn't change within that broader environment, then that's when the system itself becomes toxic. So yeah, I really like that symbolism, and while maybe trans and gender diverse people are the current martyrs of that system, there'll probably be all different types of people challenging the system, and we need that tug of war between order and chaos and change and conservation. Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, there's the adversity which comes with living a different life, and then there's the fact that so many people are controlled by gender in a way that I'm not, and I'm free.
Yeah,
I'm free from that.
Yeah, and also a lot of cissexual people are free too, because they don't experience the misalignment of their gender and sex and what was the other one we listed?
Social.
Physiological. Oh yeah, social. Yeah. All of those categories, like they experience that alignment, and so they're also free. But the social systems, I guess, that are tied to those are currently imbalanced. There's so much sexism and inequality that exists, and it's really funny for me stepping into that a bit, because like previously, if I was going to be a university professor, I could dress casually to uni and I'd be considered the cool professor, the surfy one. Like, I could not wear shoes. But if I come into uni as a woman, as a professor, and even just the pitch of my voice is higher, people take me less seriously. If I dress casually, I'm not professional. If I overdress, I'm a bitch who's trying too hard. Like, what are these social expectations?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where you are such a gift in the world to spotlight the unhealthy stuff, the sinful stuff. You as someone who is trans, being a trans woman, you bring a spotlight to say, actually, I can see some unhealthy stuff here.
Yeah.
And it's you being who you are that allows us to see that.
Amazing. Well, thanks for saying that. And I think also the same can be applied in reverse, because you are showing people that there are ways to exist that are beautiful and insightful outside of the gender binary as well. Like, as a beacon to women to be like, oh, I don't need to do all of these things to be accepted and loved. Look at Steff. They're amazing and loved and respected. So why can't I do that too? Yeah. Wow. So we're almost at an hour. We should probably start to wrap things up. I feel like I've been really enjoying this conversation and I don't want it to end. But
Mutual Appreciation Club. Just loving it.
Yeah.
You're beautiful. No, you are.
What a great way to end the conversation. We should always finish things like that. But no, I think, I guess to wrap it up, like you've definitely answered my question in a very revelationary way, that, it's definitely not wrong to be trans. The Bible, the symbolism in the Bible is actually one of freedom. And so let's live as our most free and whole selves. And that's the way to be spiritual. Yeah.
Love that.
Amazing.
Don't want to add anything. Just want to end there. Beautiful.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for speaking to me again. I hope to do this again with you soon.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's more that we can go into. Yeah,
I've had so much fun. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.